Hello, I'm Tyler Edlin. Welcome back to another episode of the Brush Sauce Theater. This will be, I believe, episode 60, the first episode of 2018. I hope you're all well. So I recently posted in the Brush Sauce Discord, link below, a few topics, open for suggestion. And brush efficiency, brush economy, brush work in general, I think, is something that came up, and I think I could just touch upon that quickly today. So let's first look at a few examples to kind of get the meaning of what I'm trying to say here. Here's a fantastic image by Mead Schaefer. Now, there's a lot going on here. It's multi-figured, there's a canon, there's action, there's storytelling. At the root of every image, the reason why us artists kind of create images and paintings to begin with is because we're trying to say something. Shapes, values, and edges can be used to answer what I'm trying to say, and this kind of boils down to how we manage our mark making and our brush work. So largely what Mead Schaefer was trying to express in this image, he did with his use of brush work. There's areas of simplicity versus areas of complexity, and there's large brush strokes versus small brush strokes. See, this is all simple and large. Oh, here we go. Simple and large. Kind of this is a nice medium range. And then we have a lot of nice, careful brush strokes all coming in through there. So small, medium, and large. Now you can almost see all of that at play in the use of his brushes here. You can almost like trace over his brush strokes. You can see them all kind of like that, and as they get closer and up toward the characters, it's getting tinier and tinier. What this also does is speeds up your workflow a lot. And so what I'm kind of trying to get down to with these examples is you can express what the message, of your image is through the design of your brushwork. And it's really like here that we can see in Richard Schmidt's painting that difference makes things interesting. The placement, the edges, the values, the colors, and of course the levels of finish. Which this can also be considered contrast. So look at how simple, like half of this image is, maybe 2/3 of this image. This is super simple, right? Large brushwork. Up here we have medium range of everything, medium brushwork, and medium levels of detail. But this image is all about this town. It's all about the setting. It's all about this place. It's all about the quaintness and almost like the isolation of it. So it's isolated, these higher areas of detail, sandwiched in between the simple and the medium. Lastly, from a contemporary artist, we have a great piece from Jamie Jones here. You can see all this at play again, right? We have massive, massive areas of simplicity here. The sky, it's pretty basic, big shape. And that's what ultimately this a lot of comes down to, is like how you can design your shapes worth of detailing versus simplicity, your brushwork of simple versus complex. Now there is some smaller brush marks made up in the clouds, but by and far most of them are massive strokes of simplicity. So brush strokes, we're going to have something that looks like this, right? Your large stuff, your larger areas. We're going to have medium, and of course your finer lines. So this can cover a lot of ground, right? Look how much ground the larger brushstroke covers. So we use that to our advantage. Lowest amount of detail possible. Think of it that way. Medium is everything. Exactly what it says. Small, it would take you forever to cover the entire canvas with this small thing. So this is what you want to do with your detail. So this is what you want to hit your detail with. It's your detail brush, your little guy. And it's the small. So the other thing worth mentioning at this point is a lot of these artists, right, they're mostly traditional, I guess with the exception of Jamie Jones, but they're only using maybe a handful of brushes. Now if you look at my wheel and I bring up my brush selection, there must be a couple hundred here. I have some even tucked away beyond menus. So often what I like to do is, based on the type of image I want to create, I'll find 5 or 6 key marquee brushes that I want to use. Something like a round or a chisel brush, right, that I can get nice shape dynamics. I have a version of this brush that has opacity on it. But either way, right, very simple. And then, of course, we have the natural media type of brushes, where you can add texture to things and add a little bit of grain and grit. So I usually find just a few different versions of that I like to include with every painting I do. And then probably something specialized. The remainder of the brushes will be something a little more special. Maybe this one for some nice painted edges and texture. This is kind of a go-to of mine. And then lastly, the other ones are like, do I need grass, do I need mountains, do I need trees? I may use a few specialized brushes, but limit your brushes, and that will help your brush efficiency as well. Now let's move on to the demo. Alright, so I'm working with this very primitive 3D model I made, and just kind of show you my plan. We use medium brushes for a lot of the sand, a large brush for the sky, and I'll be using the little brush strokes, of course, on the figures themselves. Now, this 3D gave me a solid base. I kind of know the lighting. I know it serves as a roadmap to help me get to where I need to in the finish. Now, these are stock 3D model heads. They're not great, so I'll be designing on top of them. So see, just with like 2 to 3 brush strokes, leaving some negative space in the sky, I can already imply all the clouds, the movement with them, and just kind of going back and kind of cover them up a little bit. But you know, it's all about getting a lot of mileage with each and every brush stroke. I try to make every mark on the page intentful and with purpose. It's not a bunch of randomness that I'm hoping kind of turns out well, but I'm designing these strokes. I'm making my marks kind of in the contours too of the forms that I'm painting, and so I'm coming out long like that to show how like the sand kind of curves. And the other tool that is a staple when painting with large brushes is I make a selection, right? I use the marquee tool to make a vast shape, and then I can use a bigger brush within that selection and keep a very clean edge. So some of the first edges, some of the first shapes I like to design in my scenes are the shapes of light and shadow. And so that's what I'm working on. Now there's no real texture or even fancy use of brush. This has all been fairly kind of flat, round brushes that I showed off just a few moments ago. And so see, I'm using a selection, and after I have my key shapes in there, key shapes of almost nearly flat color, then I kind of come over those in a very careful way, and I apply a little bit of that texture, a little bit of that grit to it. And this helps give the painting a little bit of detail, and it gives it a little tooth as well. You know, something that it doesn't look like it was synthetically airbrushed from something like the 80s or something. I love the 80s, but not the whole airbrush look over like a lot of the art. So yeah, I had kind of just working up the detail, broad strokes to the small ones. I am not gone into detail yet, but I'm starting to kind of finesse and kind of think about how I want these shapes to read. So very commonly what I'll do is something like this. I'll take a handful of my brush marks or my strokes, and I'll just warp them, I'll skew them, and I'll reuse my own brush marks in a canvas if it saves me some time. That wasn't necessarily about saving time in this case, but it was about kind of changing the shapes of the shapes that I painted. So like for instance, I'm doing that like this, right? I make a very careful shape by design. It's got a big edge, it's got a short edge, medium edge, and another large edge. It's, you know, there's a rhythm to it. And I'm poking out the highlight, like it's just kind of dipping in there. And that'll be the perfect little place, I figure, to nest my characters. Help sell the scale of the world, it'll give context, and increase my storytelling. So now I'm just kind of modifying my brushwork. So the other thing I like to do with my brush strokes, my brushwork in general, is use the smudge tools to kind of work their edges. That way it keeps a nice variety, right? A good painting's all about the subtle variety. So I've painted my janky little character here on his mount. It'll be a placeholder for now. I kind of made him on a separate layer on top, but it'll give me a good opportunity, right, to cast a nice little shadow in there, and to kind of, right, like little brushes where the details matter, right, where the characters are. And so now, once again, I'm going over these larger areas with textural brushes, and without changing my hue or my value too much, I'm just adding slight bits of detail, not even detail, but just texture within my flat shapes, as you can just see me doing here now with the sand. It very much, for me, helps keep things lively and a little more organic. So, for me, my painting and my brushwork often comes in the form of doing it in a few different layers, or think of it as a few different passes. Right, the simple blocky shapes, very much like the 3D model head, and then I'll just start painting over it, bigger strokes to smaller as necessary. So now I need to start designing out my figureheads, and I'm going to change up a lot of the 3D model. It's great as a base, but again, if everybody uses the same stock model that I had, everyone's going to be making the same looking pictures. So I'm changing up not only the anatomy, the geometry, and the design of it. I'm giving it a little bit of my own, I'm putting my own stamp on it, making it mine. At least I'm trying to. So I'm using just the colors that are there. I haven't kind of figured out the material yet, but I want to just again, using the smaller brushes now, the smallest brushes I've really used, to kind of work out these smaller shapes, to put these finer details on the scene itself. So this is where I definitely would get some cultural references. I'd look up some Mayan, some Aztec, some Persian, anything I can find to give this a little bit of identity and a little bit of flavor. It needs flavor. It's just a very bold, boring, plain design. So again, I'm quickly running through it using. It's a pretty small brush, but I'm blocking out, of course, the shapes and the forms. That way, when I can kind of correct it and course correct it like I'm doing now, right? I'm darkening it all, making the texture a little bit different. I can, very much like you can see me doing here, I'm applying a few different layers of brush strokes over that flat geometric shape, and that helps make it look a little bit more painted, hand painted anyways, rather than stock 3D model. That's never a good thing. So of course I have warm colors on the undersides from the warm of the texture of the ground, cooler on the surfaces of the side, the ambient lighting coming in from the sky, the fill light. And now of course I can do all the fancy little set dressings and the last minute bits of detail to kind of make a really cool scene. So as simple as the narrative is here, the little character wanders up with his little buddy, and they activate this ancient statue. I know it's really deep storytelling going on, but I think an image with a story that's fairly self-explanatory is always a good thing. So I'm just kind of painting in his little buddy, and yeah, everybody will be on their merry way. But it's not till these last stages I kind of color correct it all. I flip the image back and forth many times. I simplify brushwork if necessary, and I will complicate it. I'll add a few more strokes on the more important areas. But it's all by design, and I think that's the important thing. And that's what I do with my students. I help them get to their design, the root of what they're trying to say with their images, the best way I can. And then that way everything has an intent, it's got a purpose, and hopefully with them all in place, it goes forward. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to leave me ideas and future topics to cover in the comments. Take care. Thanks for watching, particularly if you...
Okay, the first exercise is doing a painting using just burnt umber and white. When I first started oil painting, I did this a lot, and it helped me with so many things because when you take out color, when you don't have to worry about color, you can focus better on other aspects of painting. It's also good because it's just very simple and easy to do and get going. Like you don't have to put out a bunch of colors. You just put out burnt umber and white, and you go. It's also helpful to use a color photo because it's going to help you with learning how to translate color into value. Now this can really help you with drawing. In this one here, I did use a proportional divider at the very beginning just to get some basic measurements, kind of like the top of the cowboy and then where certain things fell. But after that, I just tried to draw using shapes. And when you squint your eyes, it's going to be easier to see these shapes. And just the more you can think of your subject in terms of value shapes, the more everything is going to be easier. This exercise is also great because it's going to help you rank values. You're gonna have to constantly be comparing values. And what I did here was pretty early on, I got my darkest dark and my lightest lights in early. That way, as I went, I knew everything had to fall somewhere between those. This exercise is also going to help you doing what I like to call pushing and pulling values. Meaning whenever you put a value down, that doesn't mean that the value is going to stay that value till the end of the painting. A lot of times you put a value down, and once you get other values around it, it makes you see that initial value differently and you have to adjust it. And that's part of the oil painting process. It's one of the more fun parts of the process, is constantly changing and pushing and pulling values. And when you're working with just one color, it makes doing that a lot more straightforward. A lot of students think that they have a color problem and they want to understand color more when they actually have a value problem. All right, welcome to Paint Coach. My name is Chris Fornatero, and I'm here to help simplify painting so that you can get better faster. So why is it important to do exercises? Well, for a lot of reasons. One, it's a great way to paint and take the pressure off. Like, you don't have the pressure of doing like a full completed polished painting. It's a good way to get a fresh look at things if you feel like you've gotten stale with your work or you're in a slump and like working on something you just can't get it to work. Put it aside and do an exercise. It's a good palette cleanser. Let's get on to exercise number 2, which is painting an apple in a limited number of brush strokes. Now for this particular exercise, I first did an apple with 25 brush strokes, and then I did it again with 15, and then again with 10. And with this exercise, a brush stroke starts once you put your brush on the canvas, and it doesn't end until you pull it off the canvas. So that means that you can get pretty creative with what you could consider one brush stroke. And you're going to want to do these relatively small. Here I just took a 9x12 linen panel and taped it off into quadrants. You're also probably going to want to use some kind of medium. I like to use Gamblin solvent-free gel. It's just going to help the paint flow better. You don't want a dry stroke. You want to kind of make a stroke last as long as possible, and the solvent-free gel is going to do that. Now what this is going to help you with, it's going to help you become more efficient with your brush work. If you've ever looked at somebody like John Singer Sargent's work, you're probably like amazed at how simple or how few brush strokes he could communicate something. Like he could communicate an entire like finger in very limited strokes, or just like the side of a face. You could see like one long stroke. And doing this exercise, it's going to make you stop and think about your brush work. A lot of times with students' work, I just see a lot of unintentional brush strokes that are just there just to kind of keep the flow going, and they're just, you know, kind of dabbing their brush or doing a bunch of little small strokes because doing small little strokes feels safe. This is also going to make you just use a brush differently. Like when you're moving your brush, trying to extend a stroke as long as possible, you're gonna be like twisting your brush, you're gonna be moving your elbow up and pulling and pushing in different directions, which is a very good thing. It's also gonna help you just think about the form of what you're painting more. If you're somebody that wants to paint more loose, this is one of the best exercises to try. Now, if you're looking at this exercise and thinking, Chris, that looks fun, but like I struggle with color. I want to get better at mixing color. In the first exercise you talked about, didn't use color. Well, don't worry, because I actually have a color coaching guide for free. It's a series of videos where I break down color so you can understand it and kind of give you. The link to get that is in the description of this video. Third exercise is doing a mini landscape master copy. Doing master copy landscapes in general is really helpful, but I feel like doing them super small really helps you understand the big picture of what that painter was doing. You know, it's easy to kind of get caught up in details of master's work and all the different subtle shifts in color and value and everything. But I feel like the most important thing is to understand how the big elements of the painting are working together. Because if you don't get that, all the little detail and small things don't matter. In this one here, I made it as small as 3 by 4 inches, and it's a master copy from an Edgar Payne painting. And for this one in particular, there's just something so fun about doing such a grand scene of the Grand Canyon. It's such a small little canvas. Now, I'll be the first to admit I used to hate doing these small little studies. I'd see other painters doing them and I would try them and they were just really bad. I just would kind of let myself off the hook by saying, oh, I'm just not good at small paintings. Like I need to paint big. But looking back, truth was, I just didn't understand what made a landscape painting work. And that is understanding it on this base, simple level. If you can't get a landscape to work in a small little study with just big, simple shapes, it's not going to get any easier. In fact, it's probably going to get harder to try and blow it up to a bigger size painting. If you struggle with doing small landscapes, just remember it's an indicator that you still need practice on what makes a landscape work, which is understanding these big, simple shapes of color and value. All right, exercise number 4 is doing a mini portrait. Now, just like doing a mini landscape, doing a mini portrait is going to help you focus on what really makes a portrait work, which is the overall big picture of things. Now, a lot of students come to me saying like, oh, I struggle painting eyes, I struggle painting noses and mouth and features and details and hair. And all that stuff is really important to study and get better at, and you need to know how to do to paint a portrait. But I feel like the first and most important thing is just understanding the overall form of the head. If you can understand this and wrap your mind around the form of the head and how just light and shadow work on a face, it's gonna make all those other things a lot easier to do. But this is why I put this exercise in my portrait course. And interestingly enough, this was the exercise I feel like students struggled with the most. You know, the exercise where you paint a nose and you paint an eye and a mouth, they handled that really well. But when it came to just understanding this base, simple form of the head, they struggled with it a little bit more. Now, if you still like don't fully understand the importance of being able to paint a head super small and simple, I always like to do the example of comparing it to like a book. So a full completed portrait is like the Lord of the Rings book series. 3 very long books, lots of detail, lots of things to get into. But I also feel like you need to be able to just say what the story is in a couple sentences. Like I can say very simply and easily that Lord of the Rings is about a group of hobbits that are on a journey to destroy an evil ring of power. Very simple, but you know what it is. The same thing goes for portraits. You kind of have to be able to understand the form and the shape of the head in that very simplistic, straightforward way. Now, in doing this exercise, you can do the head like up to 5 inches tall. I wouldn't get any bigger than that. And when you start, try to identify the light and the shadow first. Then look for subtle changes within those, whether it's reflected light in the shadows or lighter areas in the light side of the face. All right, number 5 is doing a small landscape with a very big brush. Now, this is different than the small master copy landscape, because not only do I want you to do it relatively small, it doesn't have to be, 3 by 4 inches like the previous one. It can be, just 6 by 8, but I want you to use a very big brush, biggest brushes you can. And this one, I actually did a 6 by 8 inch canvas with a number 9 brush. And this big brush is going to force you to think and paint in big, simple shapes. It's also going to force you to use the proper amount of paint. A lot of times with students, they're not using as much paint as they should be. And since you got this big brush and you can't get into detail, you're going to learn what's important to have in the painting and what needs to be left out. It's also going to show you and teach you how to use a brush in a lot of different ways. People always ask me like, what brushes do I use? And I actually use very few brushes throughout a painting because I know how to use a brush in a lot of different ways. And I always am telling my students, learn to use a brush in different ways and to get a lot of different strokes out of one brush. And there's an old saying with oil painting, and it applies here more than ever, which is use a bigger brush than you think you need. All right, number 6 is painting planed fruit. Now, I've made a couple videos on this, and this is a big favorite of my students. They always love it when I put out tutorials of planed fruit. And I've gotten a lot of people asking me, like, where can I buy these? And you can't really buy them anywhere. I had to make them. I was searching forever trying to find somewhere to buy them or get someone to make them for me. But I ended up just making them out of air dried clay. Got some air dried clay, kind of molded them as best I could. I found it helped to like let it dry a little bit, like let it dry for a day. So it's a little hard, and that makes it a little easier to carve the flat planes. And you have to use like a little bit of water to kind of smooth them out and everything. But once they dried, I just painted them with acrylic paint, and boom, got some plain fruit. Painting plain fruit is so helpful because it's going to help you add a certain amount of blockiness to your painting, which helps you portray structure and gives things weight. Andrew Loomis talks about this in his book as it pertains to painting portraits, and saying that when a portrait or a face is drawn too smooth and too slick and round, it lacks any kind of structure and weight to it. But then again, if you draw it too blocky and too rigid, it looks like it's made out of wood or stone, which you don't want it to go all the way that way. But in my experience, students tend to
Brushwork is fundamental in the appearance of the painted surface. Most people think that one only needs to get the
So the one idea that instantly helped me